Sometimes we'll be contacted by a person who says that they were injured at work or while working, maybe even in a car crash while working. When you're injured on the job, there are a complete different set of unique laws that apply to that event. And really it goes back more than 100 years. And there's a trade-off that's been created between employers and employees that employees probably don't even know anything about. But if you go back, say, 150 years ago, there were no workers' compensation benefits. If you got hurt on the job and your employer was negligent, you sued your employer. And you can imagine what that looks like with a workplace relationship, right? Where the employee is in the midst of a lawsuit. So at some point, there was a reform that is not really great for the employee. It was more employer driven, but that exchange is this. If you are injured on the job, and if your employer purchased workers' compensation insurance, by purchasing that workers' compensation insurance, the state grants immunity to your employer against any other claims you might be able to bring against the employer other than your workers' compensation claim, unless the employer acted intentionally or with a great willful disregard for your safety, essentially. A very, very high standard. So for the most part, if you're injured on the job, as it relates to the claims you can make against your own employer or workplace, you're limited to whatever the workers' compensation system in your state provides for you. It grants immunity to the employer, and you're stuck with the benefits in the system. Now, there are some favorable parts about it. First of all, that system will pay all of your medical expenses. There's a downside there in that the employer gets to, in the first instance, choose where you're going to go get your medical treatment, which seems kind of weird, but that does happen. This system will pay for you if you're off of work. It'll pay for you if you miss part days or full days from work. And it doesn't pay 100%. It tries to equal your post-tax net income up to a certain dollar limit. And then there's some award that you can receive from the system for any permanent impairment that you have, but you get no compensation for pain or suffering or inconvenience or for the trauma or turmoil that you've been through. None of that in the workers' compensation system. Extremely important, though, that you talk with a lawyer who's well-versed in workers' compensation, because there's a lot of little avenues. And for instance, if you just injure one leg, that's a much lower value if it's injured permanently than if it's your leg and your low back. So there's a combination of things that those who deal with workers' compensation cases can and do know about the system to maximize the recovery and to make sure, in some cases, there's also penalties if you are drinking or doing drugs. There's a limited amount. It's 50% of the benefit. So there's a lot of legal issues that arise, but it's within that workers' compensation system that you have to tackle. Now, there is an important distinction. If you're in a car crash and you're on the job, but the car crash is caused by somebody else, or you're on a work site and you're injured, but it's not caused by your co-employee, it's caused by, let's say, another subcontractor's employee, then you may have a workers' compensation case. You will have one if you're injured on the job, but you also may have what's called a third-party case. You still then can have a case against the other driver or the other contractor. You just can't bring any other claims against your own employer outside of the workers' compensation system. So you can see it's pretty complex. It's important. Each state has their own workers' compensation statutes. You don't get to go to court. You go to an administrative law process. It's a very unique statutorily or legally created system to handle injuries that occur on the job, and it's very important that you're represented through that.